Disclaimer: this story is a work of creative nonfiction inspired by true events. Names, locations, and certain details have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. The emotions and experiences described are deeply personal and reflect the complexities of relationships and family dynamics. Reader discretion is advised as the story deals with sensitive themes including infidelity and emotional trauma. For as long as I can remember, I believed I had the perfect family. A loving husband, a bright and cheerful son, and a home filled with warmth and laughter. We were the kind of family that friends envied and strangers admired. Every morning, I would wake up to the sound of my son's excited chatter and the reassuring presence of my husband's embrace. Life felt like a beautiful, unbroken circle. Our weekends were spent together, exploring parks or watching movies cuddled on the couch. I treasured the small rituals, our Saturday pancake breakfasts, the bedtime stories my husband read to our son, and the quiet evenings spent planning for our future. In those moments, I felt complete, secure in the knowledge that my family was everything I ever wanted. I had always trusted my husband implicitly. He was attentive, kind, and patient, the ideal partner and father. Even on difficult days, when work pressures mounted or our son fell ill, he stood steadfast, supporting me with quiet strength. We talked openly about our dreams and fears, sharing laughter and tears as one. I thought we had built a foundation unshakable by any outside force. But life, I soon learned, has a way of shattering illusions when you least expect it. There were tiny cracks I ignored, missed calls he brushed off, late nights at the office he explained away. I chose to believe in the good, to focus on the love I knew rather than the shadows creeping at the edges. Our son was the heart of it all. His innocence and joy brought light to every corner of our home. I was convinced that as long as he was happy, nothing could go wrong. Yet, that night, when he whispered something to me that I could barely understand, something cold and heavy settled in my chest. It was as if a fragile glass I had been holding finally shattered. In that moment, the perfect family I thought I had began to feel fragile, uncertain, like a story on the edge of being rewritten. I couldn't yet grasp what my son was trying to tell me, but I knew it would change everything. It was just like any other evening, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the night outside. My husband had already gone to bed, exhausted from a long day at work. Our son was supposed to be fast asleep in his room, but as I sat down on the living room couch, I heard a faint whisper. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. My son's voice, barely audible but unmistakably real. He called my name softly, his small hand reaching for mine. I knelt down beside him, feeling my heart tighten with concern. "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked gently. He hesitated for a moment, eyes wide and searching, then whispered words that broke something deep inside me. "Mom. Daddy isn't who he says he is." The words hung in the air, strange and heavy, like a secret I wasn't prepared to hear. I blinked, trying to understand if I had misheard or if my tired mind was playing tricks on me. But my son's expression was earnest, scared, confused, but determined. "Tell me what you mean," I whispered back, pulling him closer. He looked away for a moment, then spoke again, his voice trembling. "He's been lying. About the woman. She's not just a friend, she's someone else. I saw them. I heard them. Mom, I'm scared." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I felt my breath catch, my world tilting on its axis. How could this be true? My husband, the man I trusted more than anyone, was hiding something so dark? The idea felt impossible, but my son's fear was palpable, and I couldn't ignore it. That night, I sat beside him, holding him tightly, trying to comfort the scared little boy who had witnessed something no child should. I wanted to shield him from the truth, to pretend everything was still safe and normal. But deep inside, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I lay awake long after he fell asleep, my mind racing. What had my son seen? How long had this been going on? Was I blind to the signs all along? Questions spiraled through my thoughts, each one more painful than the last. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run away from the nightmare that had suddenly entered our home. But I stayed silent, torn between protecting my family and confronting a reality I wasn't ready for. That whisper, so soft yet so shattering, was the first crack in the perfect facade we had built. It was a warning, a secret revealed in the quiet darkness of that night, and it marked the beginning of a painful journey I never expected to take. After that night, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of emotions I could hardly control. My son's whispered words echoed in my mind constantly, "Daddy isn't who he says he is." I tried to hold on to hope, convincing myself that maybe it was a misunderstanding, a child's imagination playing tricks. But deep down, something had shifted irreparably. I began paying attention to the small things I had once brushed aside. The phone calls my husband took in hushed tones, the times he said he was working late but seemed distracted, the faint scent of perfume on his clothes that wasn't mine. Each detail, once insignificant, now screamed for my attention. But the hardest part was the silence between us. My husband's warmth and openness, once the foundation of our relationship, seemed to retreat behind walls I couldn't penetrate. When I tried to talk, he smiled a little too tightly or changed the subject quickly, leaving me more confused than before. My son remained my anchor. I could see the worry behind his eyes, the way he sometimes looked at his father with a mix of hope and fear. He wasn't ready to fully understand what was happening, but I knew he felt the tension just as strongly as I did. I kept asking myself, how could the man I loved betray us like this? Where had I failed to notice the signs? Was this all my fault? One evening, I found myself going through some of his messages on his phone. It was something I never thought I'd do, invading his privacy, but desperation pushed me beyond my usual boundaries. That's when I saw it, messages from a woman I didn't know, full of affectionate words and secret plans. My hands trembled as I read, heartbreaking with every line. The evidence was undeniable. I felt a mix of anger, sorrow, and disbelief. How had this happened behind my back? What did it mean for our family? For my son? The whisper from that night suddenly made perfect sense. My son wasn't imagining things, he had seen and heard the truth, the betrayal that I was only now beginning to uncover. In the days that followed, I found myself retreating into silence, grappling with a reality I couldn't ignore. The man I had trusted with my heart and my son's future was living a double life. I wanted to confront him, demand answers, but fear held me back. Fear of shattering the family completely, fear of what I might learn, fear of losing everything I had ever held dear. So, I waited, watching and listening, hoping for a sign that this nightmare could somehow be undone. But deep inside, I knew that the journey ahead would be painful, and nothing would ever be the same. The days following my discovery were some of the hardest I've ever faced. The house felt heavy with secrets I could no longer ignore. Every glance exchanged between my husband and me was charged with unspoken tension. I was trapped in a painful limbo, desperate to confront the truth but terrified of the consequences. One evening, when my son was asleep, I gathered the courage to speak to my husband directly. I showed him the messages I had found, my voice shaking as I asked him to explain. For a long moment, he was silent, eyes downcast, unable to meet mine. Then, finally, he confessed. He admitted to the affair, a brief but intense connection with a woman he had met at work. He said he never meant for it to happen, that it was a terrible mistake born of loneliness and weakness. He begged for forgiveness, promising it would never happen again. Hearing those words broke something inside me. I felt like I was falling apart, but at the same time, a strange clarity washed over me. The hidden truth was no longer a secret whispered in the dark, it was laid bare between us, raw and painful. My son's whisper that night had been a warning, a plea for me to open my eyes. Now that I had, there was no turning back. But even as I listened to his apology, I couldn't stop the flood of emotions, anger, betrayal, sadness, and fear for what this meant for our family. I thought about my son, who had sensed the fracture long before I did. How would this change him? Would he feel safe? Would he still trust his father? The next days were filled with difficult conversations, with my husband, with my son, and with myself. I tried to hold our family together, but the foundation felt cracked, unstable. Sometimes, I caught my son watching his father with a questioning look in his eyes, as if he was searching for the man he once knew. It hurt me to see the innocence in him fade, replaced by confusion and hurt. I realized that healing wouldn't come quickly or easily. It would take time, patience, and honesty from all of us. Despite the pain, I knew I had to be strong, not just for myself, but for my son. We needed to find a way through this darkness together, even if the path was uncertain. The moment I had dreaded finally arrived, undeniable proof that shattered my world completely. I had hoped, somewhere deep inside, that maybe the affair was over, that it was a mistake buried in the past. But the truth was far worse. One afternoon, I found photos on my husband's phone, pictures of him with the other woman, smiling intimately, holding hands. There was no way to deny it anymore. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was real and ongoing. My son's whispered words that night echoed loudly in my mind. He had seen something I had refused to accept. The innocence in his voice was heartbreaking because he had carried this secret with the burden of a child far too mature for his years. When I finally showed him the photos, my son's eyes welled with tears. "I told you, Mom," he said softly. "I wanted you to know before it got worse." It broke me, the pain, the heartbreak, the feeling of being utterly alone in a home that should have been a sanctuary. I felt anger burning inside, but beneath it all, there was a deep sadness that weighed on my chest like a stone. How could the man I loved betray me and our son? How could he risk tearing our family apart for something so fleeting? That night, I sat alone in my room, tears streaming down my face. The home that had once been filled with laughter now felt cold and unfamiliar. I thought about the years we had spent together, the promises made, the dreams shared. How many of those moments were real? How many were just part of a fragile illusion? My son came to me quietly and wrapped his small arms around me. "We're still a family, right?" he whispered. I didn't have an answer. The pain was too fresh, too raw. But I knew one thing, our family would never be the same. The days after the revelation were filled with an unbearable silence. The home that once buzzed with warmth felt fractured, every room echoing with tension. My husband and I moved around each other like strangers, the weight of betrayal hanging heavily between us. Our son watched us carefully, sensing the change but too young to fully understand. I wrestled with a torrent of emotions, anger, hurt, confusion, and grief. How do you continue living with someone who has broken your trust so deeply? The man who once promised forever was now the source of my greatest pain. Conversations with my husband were difficult and strained. Sometimes, he tried to explain, to apologize, but the words felt empty against the backdrop of what he had done. Other times, he shut down completely, as if unable to face the consequences of his actions. My son, however, was my constant reminder that life must go on. I saw the toll this was taking on him. His bright eyes were clouded with questions, and sometimes he would ask me if everything was going to be okay. I didn't always have the answers. One night, I sat down with him and tried to reassure him. "We're going to get through this together," I told him, even though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. I wanted to be strong for him, to protect his innocence and give him hope in the midst of chaos. Yet, behind closed doors, I struggled to hold myself together. I questioned everything, my worth, my decisions, and the future of our family. The betrayal felt like a wound that refused to heal, and every day was a battle to keep going. Despite the pain, I began to realize that hiding from the truth wouldn't make it disappear. We needed to face the fallout, honestly and openly, if there was any chance of healing. Slowly, I started seeking support. I talked to close friends, and eventually, I found the courage to speak with a counselor. Sharing my story with someone who could listen without judgment was a small but vital step toward reclaiming myself. The path ahead was uncertain. I didn't know if forgiveness was possible or if our family could ever be whole again. But I knew I had to find a way to survive, not just for me, but for my son, who needed me now more than ever. The days following the fallout were some of the darkest I had ever experienced. Yet, amid the pain and uncertainty, I began to glimpse a fragile hope, the possibility of healing. I realized that if I wanted to move forward, I needed to take care of myself first. I started attending counseling sessions, where I learned to confront my feelings without judgment. I allowed myself to cry, to feel anger, and even moments of numbness. It was a process of slowly reclaiming my identity beyond the betrayal. At home, I focused on my son. He was still my light in the darkness, and I wanted to protect him from the worst of the pain. We talked openly about what he had seen and felt, reassuring him that it wasn't his fault. I wanted him to know that family doesn't just mean perfect moments, it means love, even when things are broken. My husband, too, made efforts to change. He attended therapy and tried to rebuild trust, not just with words but with actions. Some days were better than others, setbacks came often, but so did small signs of progress. Forgiveness was not immediate, nor was it guaranteed. I wrestled with the idea of whether I could ever fully trust him again or if our relationship could survive such a deep wound. But I realized that healing wasn't about forgetting or pretending everything was okay. It was about finding peace within myself and deciding what kind of future I wanted. I began to focus on small victories, a genuine conversation, a day without tears, a moment of laughter with my son. These became the building blocks of my recovery. In this journey, I discovered a strength I didn't know I had. The pain had broken me, yes, but it also pushed me to grow and find resilience. I learned that sometimes the hardest truths lead us to the strongest versions of ourselves. While the scars of infidelity would always remain, I knew I could choose how they shaped my life, as chains or as lessons. As time passed, the raw edges of pain began to soften, and I found myself standing on new ground, not the perfect family I once imagined, but a family reshaped by truth and resilience. The journey had been heartbreaking and difficult, but it taught me invaluable lessons about love, trust, and strength. I realized that life isn't about avoiding pain, it's about facing it head-on, learning from it, and moving forward with courage. My son remains my greatest motivation. Seeing him grow up with kindness and hope, despite everything, reminds me that even shattered families can rebuild in new ways. His whispered warning that night was a turning point, painful, yes, but necessary. It forced me to confront a reality I might have otherwise ignored, and ultimately, it gave me the power to change my life. I've come to understand that forgiveness is a journey, not a destination. Whether my husband and I will fully heal together remains uncertain, but I have found peace within myself. I am stronger, more aware, and ready to protect my son and myself no matter what lies ahead. Our story is not one of fairy tale endings, but of real life, messy, painful, and beautiful in its own way. And through it all, I hold on to hope that truth will always lead us toward light, even in the darkest nights.